If you were a fan of arcade games in the mid-1990s, you might remember this one. Midway's NHL Open Ice Challenge was released in November 1995 and was an all-time classic. From just looking at this game, it's pretty obvious that they were going for an NBA Jam approach here. However, as cool as that game looks and as much fun as it is to play, it was nowhere near as successful as NBA Jam. It is a fun game, don't get me wrong, but this game is not remembered anywhere near as fondly as NBA Jam was, nor was it anywhere near as successful financially. And there are some pretty interesting reasons why this game wasn't so successful. So the first thing you've got to understand is that the NHL actually had become quite popular by the end of the 1994 season. That year's Canucks-Rangers Stanley Cup is remembered to this day as one of the best Stanley Cup finals of all time. The NHL was getting a lot of media attention thanks in large part to the labor strife that was distracting Americans from the Major League Baseball season. So it wasn't until August 1994 that the baseball players went on strike, which canceled the rest of the season. But of course, the NHL didn't really do much better. There was this big fight over collective bargaining and a potential salary cap, which led to one of the most destructive lockouts in league history. The lockout was really ugly and undid a lot of the goodwill and progress that the league had accumulated over the recent years. The NHLPA set up something called the 4-on-4 Challenge that November to try to maintain fan interest, though it didn't really work. Wayne Gretzky also got together with a couple of players to form a team that played exhibition games throughout Europe. It was something, I guess, but this just wasn't the same as the NHL. Now, the lockout finally ended in January 1995. NHL Open Ice was released in November 1995, so you think that would be enough time for fans to forgive and forget. But I do have a feeling that the lack of widespread popularity of this game probably had at least something to do with that lockout. The second problem is the game itself. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mean to say that this is a bad game or that it's not fun. It's just that it doesn't feel like hockey, if you know what I mean. At times, it's just too easy to score goals. Other times, it's way too hard to prevent the other team from scoring. And you know, as cool as some of these visual effects are, the game feels like it's totally random. Now, to be fair to NHL Open Ice, it's not the only Midway arcade game that feels totally random. Actually, it was that total randomness that was part of what made NBA Jam so successful. If you've ever tried playing NBA Jam seriously, you know about these times near the end of the game where the computer will just cheat, making it so you cannot possibly score. Actually, there are strategies you can use to prevent this from happening, though they're not always so obvious. Anyway, there are moments in this game that are just as frustrating. And seriously, it's so easy to score in this game that it might as well be a basketball game. But the big problem with this game is something that's a little bit hard to explain to you. You kind of have to play this to understand. The thing is that you really never feel like you actually have control. This is a major problem here, especially if you compare this to NBA Jam. Again, the real issue here is defense. I mean, sure, you can do some ridiculously big hits on the other team once you get the hang of it. But it's almost impossible to see the puck, and the hits don't really seem to do anything. The sense of control in games like NHL 94, where you feel like you can just do just about anything, that sense is missing in Open Ice. Now, I know that we're talking about a totally, completely different game than NHL 94. That's obvious. We're talking about an arcade game here, not a simulation, if that's how you want to think about NHL 94. But the thing is that a hockey game without defense just doesn't feel right. And in this game, it's far too easy for you just to become lost, especially if you don't have the puck. I can't tell you how many times I lost where I was while I played this game. Compare that with Hit the Ice, an earlier arcade game which is similar but considerably slower. Hit the Ice is also totally ridiculous, but at least the game is somewhat slow. That gives you time to figure out where you are and what you're supposed to be doing. In terms of fast gameplay, Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey was a better arcade game than NHL Open Ice, because at least I can figure out where I am and what I'm supposed to be doing. Open Ice just feels way too chaotic. I mean, the thing is that even NBA Jam gives you the feeling of being in control. Now, if you play it enough, you'll notice that you're not actually in control. Like, if you're trying to get a rebound, the game will jump for you, and there are times where the game will mess with you and stuff. But at least it kind of feels like you have control, right? Now, the thing about NBA Jam is that it's not the sort of arcade game where you're like on the other side of the screen half the time and you don't know what's going on. That's the biggest problem with NHL Open Ice. Anyway, Open Ice is a cool game, and it's a lot of fun if you play a multiplayer. But if you play this one player, or if you try to play like multiple games in a row, it really is not much fun. It would really take a lot for me to want to actually play this game enough to win the cup. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. So for example, Game Informer magazine apparently said in 1997 that solo players would become bored with this game quickly. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the PlayStation version a pretty harsh review, saying that it becomes boring after a few games. And the reviewer over at GameFan noted, like I just did, that the Gretzky game was pretty much better in every single way. So like I said, you really can't blame the failure of this game just on that ridiculous NHL lockout. It was kind of the lockout effect, I guess, but the real blame in the end has to go on the game itself. I mean, NHL 95 is legitimately a fun game to play, even if I think the players tend to be a little bit too fast. The lockout didn't cause video game fans to boycott this game. Actually, it was a big seller. And the same goes for NHL 96. These are legitimately good games that sold well. Now, I've got to think that Open Ice would have done better if you could actually play defense. So many people have pointed out to me elsewhere that the reason the arcade version of NBA Hang Time was so great is because defense was so important in that game. And that game came out in what, 96, so a year after this. Wild arcade style scoring is fun, I guess, but you really need to be able to play defense. Anyway, the best part about NHL Open Ice is the codes, and of course that includes a lot of guest players. So if you know the right combination, you can unlock a whole bunch of hidden characters to make the game more fun. Mr. Hockey. Gordie Howe even plays without a helmet, which is pretty cool. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit too easy to score with him. It is fun to play for a few minutes though. But again, in the end, that's really the biggest problem with NHL Open Ice. I mean, the idea behind it is actually pretty good. Now, Midway wound up making NFL Blitz a couple of years later. That's in what, like 98 or 99? That was a much more refined arcade concept, and the truth is that playing defense in NFL Blitz is actually more fun than playing offense. Now, Open Ice eventually evolved into the NHL Hits series starting in like 2001, something like that, but that's totally different. That's a story for another day. Anyway, all in all, Open Ice is fun to play, though there really isn't much strategy. It's an impressive game for 1995, sure, but I really wish they would have focused a little bit more on gameplay and not so much on just the graphics. The game is really most fun if you've got 3 other friends around to play it with you. It really does not hold up as a single-player game. Anyway, there you have it. So this game, it's not like bad, it doesn't totally suck, but if you play it one player, it actually does kind of suck. But I will say one more thing. We need more games like this today. We have way too many sports games that are serious, and we need some games that you can just like pick up and play and that are fun. I want a hockey game where I can mow people down and I can light the net on fire with my slap shots. That's all, right? We need more of these sports games to become games again instead of just being simulations.